Commander Zixathara adjusted his crystalline armor as he gazed across the smoking battlefield of Kepler 400Y2b. The acrid smell of plasma burns and melted metal filled his breathing apparatus. But beneath it lay something sweeter, the scent of victory. After 300 cycles of brutal warfare against the Devourers, the most ruthless species the galaxy had ever known, the tide had finally turned. The Devourers were a nightmare made manifest. Standing 12 feet tall with chitinous black exoskeletons, razor-sharp mandibles, and an insatiable hunger for conquest, they had swept through 17 star systems like a plague. Their ships moved like angry hornets through space, leaving nothing but stripped worlds and silence in their wake. Entire civilizations had been consumed, their populations either enslaved or worse, converted into biofuel for the Devourer war machine. Zixathara belonged to the Velthari, a proud warrior race that had united the remaining free species of the Andromeda Coalition. His people stood 8 feet tall, their blue-tinted skin covered in natural armor plates that had evolved over millennia of warfare. The Velthari had always been the galaxy's premier military force, their tactical brilliance and superior technology making them nearly unbeatable in conventional warfare. Nearly, the Devourers had proven to be anything but conventional. They fought with a savagery that defied all military doctrine, throwing endless waves of warriors at defensive positions until even the strongest fortifications crumbled. Their ships could repair themselves using organic technology that the Coalition's best scientists couldn't fully understand. Worst of all, they seemed to learn and adapt with each battle, making strategies that worked once utterly useless in subsequent engagements. But today, on this distant world at the edge of civilized space, something had changed. The Devourer advance had stalled. For the first time in 3 centuries, their seemingly unstoppable momentum had been broken. Zixathara's forces had successfully defended the critical supply depot at New Thessia, denying the enemy the resources they needed to continue their push toward the Coalition's core worlds. "Sir, final casualty reports are coming in," announced Lieutenant Kethvar, his aide-de-camp. The younger Velthari's voice carried a mixture of exhaustion and barely contained excitement. "We've lost 43% of our ground forces, but the Devourers have withdrawn completely from this sector. The remaining ships are retreating beyond the outer planets." Zixathara nodded grimly. The losses were staggering but acceptable given what they had achieved. His tactical display showed the broader picture. Devourer forces were pulling back across multiple fronts, consolidating their positions for the first time since the war began. Intelligence reports suggested they were experiencing supply shortages and internal conflicts over their next move. "Prepare a priority transmission to High Command," Zixathara ordered. "Inform them that Operation Starbreak has succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. The enemy is showing signs of strategic confusion and resource depletion. Recommend immediate follow-up operations to capitalize on their momentary weakness." As Kethvar hurried away to compose the message, Zixathara allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Coalition had finally found a winning formula. By combining the Velthari's military expertise with the technological innovations of the silicon-based Nexari and the hive-mind coordination of the insectoid Zephyrians, they had created battle strategies that could match the Devourer's adaptability. The secret had been in accepting losses that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Traditional Coalition warfare emphasized minimal casualties and surgical precision. Against the Devourers, such approaches had proven disastrously inadequate. Only by embracing a more ruthless mindset, one that prioritized victory over individual survival, had they begun to turn the tide. 3 days later, Zixathara stood in the command center of the Coalition flagship Righteous Fury. The massive vessel, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, served as the mobile headquarters for the entire war effort. Its quantum processors constantly analyzed battlefield data from across the galaxy, feeding information to the strategic planning centers, where the Coalition's brightest minds worked around the clock to stay one step ahead of their enemies. "Commander, we're receiving reports from all active fronts," announced Admiral Thexandra, the overall military commander of Coalition forces. Her aged features bore the weight of 3 centuries of leadership, but her eyes still blazed with the fierce determination that had made her a legend among her people. "The Devourers appear to be in full retreat across the outer rim. 14 star systems have been liberated in the past week alone. The command center erupted in barely restrained celebration. Officers from dozens of different species exchanged what passed for congratulations in their various cultures. The massive holographic display showed the tactical situation across half the galaxy, with green coalition markers steadily replacing the ominous red of Devourer-controlled space. Zix Thera studied the display carefully, his trained mind analyzing patterns and possibilities. Something about the enemy's retreat troubled him, though he couldn't quite identify what. The Devourers had never shown any inclination toward strategic withdrawal before. They fought to the last warrior in every engagement, treating retreat as a concept foreign to their nature. "Admiral, have our intelligence divisions determined why the enemy has suddenly adopted these new tactical patterns?" he asked. Thexandra's expression grew thoughtful. "Our analysts believe they've finally reached the limits of their expansion. Their supply lines are overextended, their forces spread too thin across too many fronts. The laws of logistics apply even to them, it seems." "Perhaps," Zix Thera replied, though doubt gnawed at him, "but I recommend we maintain heightened alert status. An enemy that has surprised us this many times before may yet have more surprises in store." The Admiral nodded approvingly. "Agreed. Order all fleet commanders to remain at battle readiness despite our recent successes. We cannot afford to assume this war is over until the last Devourer ship has been destroyed." As the briefing continued, Zix Thera found his attention drawn to a small notation on the tactical display, a tiny blue dot in an unremarkable system at the very edge of explored space, marked only with the designation Sol 3. According to the database, it was home to a species that had achieved spaceflight just recently, still confined to their single star system and classified as a pre-contact civilization. Under Coalition protocols, he wondered briefly what such a primitive species might think if they knew about the vast war raging across the galaxy. Would they even be capable of understanding the scale of the conflict? Or would their limited technology leave them blissfully ignorant of how close they had come to extinction? Little did Zix Thera know that this seemingly insignificant world would soon change everything he thought he knew about warfare, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to fight for survival. 3 weeks after the Coalition's first major victory, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The Devourer retreat had continued across multiple sectors, but intelligence reports painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Rather than fleeing in disarray, the enemy appeared to be regrouping with ominous purpose. Dr. Vexmira, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist, stood before the emergency council session aboard the Righteous Fury. Her forearms moved in complex patterns as she manipulated the holographic display, showing cellular analysis of captured Devourer tissue samples. The assembled commanders from across the galaxy watched with growing unease as the data unfolded before them. "The biological scans are unprecedented," Dr. Vexmira explained, her translator struggling with the complex scientific terminology of her native Karani language. "The Devourers aren't just retreating, they're evolving. Their cellular structure has undergone rapid mutations in the past month, changes that should take thousands of years to manifest naturally." Admiral Thexandra leaned forward in her command chair. "Explain the tactical implications, Doctor." "Their carapaces have become 30% thicker. Neural pathways show increased complexity, suggesting enhanced cognitive function. Most concerning, they've developed new organ systems that our sensors can't fully identify." The hologram zoomed in on strange, pulsing structures within the Devourer anatomy. "We believe these may be adaptive organs, capable of rapid modification to counter specific threats." Commander Zix Thera felt a chill run through his crystalline spine. "You're suggesting they've learned to consciously evolve in response to our tactics?" "Worse than that," Dr. Vexmira replied grimly. "The rate of change indicates external manipulation. Someone or something is accelerating their evolution artificially. The implications hit the Council like a plasma blast. If the Devourers had access to technology advanced enough to trigger rapid biological evolution, the Coalition's recent victories might have been nothing more than a temporary setback, while their enemies prepared for the next phase of the war. Admiral Thexandra stood, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the tactical display. "How long before these changes manifest in their combat effectiveness?" "Unknown, but our projections suggest weeks rather than months. Admiral, we need to consider the possibility that everything we've encountered so far has been merely the advance force of something much larger and more dangerous." 2 days later, those fears proved prophetic. Long-range sensors detected massive gravitational anomalies at the edge of Devourer space. When the quantum telescopes finally resolved the disturbances, the sight left even veteran commanders speechless. Ships beyond anything previously encountered were emerging from what appeared to be artificially generated wormholes. Vessels so large they dwarfed entire moons, their surfaces writhing with organic technology that defied conventional understanding. "By the eternal void," whispered Captain Mordek of the Nixari Engineering Corps. His silicon-based form flickered with data streams as he processed the incoming sensor information. "Those aren't ships, they're living creatures. Bioships on a scale we never imagined possible." The largest of these monstrosities stretched over 50 kilometers in length, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that resembled neural networks. Smaller vessels, though still massive by coalition standards, swarmed around it like antibodies protecting a vital organ. The entire formation moved with a coordination that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Intelligence Division Captain Kelvana materialized her spectral form beside the main display, her energy-based physiology allowing her to interface directly with the ship's computer systems. Quantum analysis indicates these vessels contain technology at least 1,000 years more advanced than anything in our databases. Energy signatures suggest power sources we don't even have theoretical frameworks to understand. Admiral Thexandra watched the display with the grim expression of someone witnessing their own doom. "Estimated time to reach coalition space? At current velocity, approximately 6 standard days," Captain Kelvana replied. "But Admiral, there's something else. We're detecting transmission bursts from the lead bioship. The signals are directed toward multiple points throughout former Devourer territory." A general recall, Zixthera realized. They're summoning every Devourer force back to form a unified army. The war room fell silent as the full magnitude of their situation became clear. The Coalition had spent centuries fighting what they believed was the full might of the Devourer Empire. In reality, they had been battling only scattered advance scouts while the true enemy prepared for this moment. Emergency protocols activated across the galaxy as word of the bioship fleet spread. Civilian populations began massive evacuations from frontier worlds. Military shipyards worked around the clock to complete vessels that were still years from their planned completion dates. Every available resource was redirected toward preparation for what military strategists were already calling the final war. But the Coalition's industrial might, impressive as it was, paled in comparison to what the enemy had revealed. Intelligence estimates suggested the bioship fleet alone outmassed the entire Coalition Navy by a factor of 10. Worse, preliminary analysis indicated the new Devourer forces possessed weapons that could destroy planets, not merely conquer them. On the bridge of the Righteous Fury, Admiral Thexandra convened an emergency session with military leaders from across Coalition space. The holographic forms of generals, admirals, and strategists flickered around the command table, their faces bearing the weight of impending extinction. "Options?" the Admiral asked simply. "We could attempt a fighting withdrawal to the core systems," suggested General Hixtara of the Zephyrian hive mind. "Consolidate our forces for a final defensive stand." "Unacceptable," replied Marshal Vakmar of the militant Karani. "Such a strategy concedes defeat before the battle begins. We must strike first while they're still consolidating their forces." "With what?" Commander Zixthera interjected. "Our most optimistic projections show them outnumbering us 50 to 1. A direct assault would be suicide." The debate continued for hours, but no viable strategy emerged. Every tactical scenario ended the same way: total annihilation of Coalition forces. The enemy had revealed themselves to be so far beyond anything the galaxy had previously encountered that conventional military thinking simply didn't apply. As the session wound down in frustrated defeat, Admiral Thexandra made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. "We need to consider options outside conventional warfare. Contact the Intelligence Division's Special Projects Unit. Authorization Code Omega-7. Admiral," Zixthera said carefully, "that authorization level accesses projects that violate multiple articles of the Galactic Accords." "The Galactic Accords assumed we would never face extinction," she replied. "Special Projects has been monitoring pre-contact civilizations for potential military applications. It's time to see if any of their research has practical value." Within hours, classified files began arriving at the Admiral's personal terminal. Most contained species too primitive to be useful. Civilizations that had barely mastered fire, let alone spaceflight. But one file caught her attention. A species from the Sol system that had achieved nuclear technology and was beginning to explore their local space. The psychological profile made for fascinating reading. Unlike every other known sapient species, these humans appeared to possess an almost pathological inability to surrender. Their history was filled with accounts of individuals and small groups holding out against overwhelming odds, often achieving impossible victories through sheer bloody-minded determination. More intriguingly, they had evolved as persistence hunters, a trait almost unknown among intelligent species. While most sapiens had developed intelligence to avoid prolonged conflict, humans seemed to thrive on it. Their literature celebrated concepts like fighting to the last, man and death before dishonor that other species found difficult to comprehend. Admiral Thexandra closed the file and stared out at the stars. In 6 days, the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen would begin its final assault on civilization itself. Perhaps it was time to introduce the Devourers to a species that had never learned when to quit. The first human to set foot aboard a coalition vessel did so in circumstances that defied every protocol in the Galactic Contact Manual. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Force had been conducting a routine patrol mission around Jupiter's moons when his small reconnaissance craft detected impossible energy signatures near the asteroid belt. What he found there changed everything. The coalition's stealth ship Silent Observer had been monitoring human space communications for months, gathering intelligence on this peculiar species that seemed to wage war as casually as other civilizations conducted trade negotiations. When Sergeant Chen's ship approached their position, the coalition crew faced an unprecedented decision: maintain their covert status or make first contact with a species they desperately needed to understand. Captain Lixandra, commander of the Silent Observer, made the choice that would alter the course of galactic history. She decloaked her vessel. Jesus Christ! Chen's voice crackled over the communication array as his primitive sensors registered the massive coalition ship materializing out of empty space. Control, are you seeing this? We've got a contact the size of a city block that just appeared out of nowhere. Dr. Yintala, the ship's xenopsychologist, monitored the humans' bio-readings with fascination. Instead of the terror or religious awe that marked most species' first contact with advanced aliens, Sergeant Chen displayed what could only be described as aggressive curiosity. His heart rate increased, but his breathing remained steady. His neural patterns showed rapid tactical assessment rather than panic. Unknown vessel, this is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Force, came the transmission. I'm going to assume you can understand me, since your technology clearly outclasses ours by a few centuries. What are your intentions in human space? Captain Lixandra felt her breathing spiracles flutter with amusement. Most species begged for mercy or offered immediate surrender when confronted with superior technology. This human was demanding to know her intentions as if he had any ability to enforce compliance with his answer. Sergeant Chen, she replied, activating the universal translator. I am Captain Lixandra of the Andromeda Coalition. We have been observing your species for potential military cooperation. The galaxy faces a threat that requires unconventional approaches. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Chen responded. Military cooperation? Lady, I don't know what you've been watching, but humanity's not exactly ready for interstellar warfare. We can barely keep our own planet from blowing itself up. That, Dr. Yintala interjected privately, may be precisely why we need them. What followed was the most irregular first contact in recorded history. Rather than following established protocols involving gradual revelation and careful cultural preparation, Captain Lixandra found herself explaining the galactic situation to a single human soldier floating in a tiny spacecraft held together with what her sensors identified as primitive alloys and controlled fusion. Let me get this straight, Chen said after listening to 20 minutes of exposition. You've got a galaxy-spanning civilization that's been fighting these devourer things for 300 years. And you're losing so badly that you're asking a species that hasn't even figured out faster than light travel for help? The situation is more complex than— No, I get it, Chen interrupted. You've been fighting smart, using superior tactics and technology. Problem is, these things adapt faster than you can innovate, so you need someone too stupid to fight smart. The uncomfortable accuracy of that assessment sent ripples of concern through the coalition crew. Dr. Yintala began rapid analysis of human military history, focusing on conflicts where technological underdogs had achieved unlikely victories. "Sergeant," Captain Lixandra said carefully, "would you be willing to accompany us to meet with our military leadership? Your perspective might provide valuable insights." Chen's laughter echoed through the communication system. "You want to take a human to your war council? That's either the best idea you've ever had, or the worst mistake in galactic history. Probably both." 2 days later, Admiral Thexandra stood in the Righteous Fury's main briefing room, staring at the most primitive sapient she had ever encountered. Sergeant Chen wore a simple pressure suit that looked like it had been constructed from scrap metal. His weapons consisted of chemical projectile launchers that couldn't penetrate Coalition personal shields. By every rational measure, he represented a species so far behind Galactic standard that they shouldn't even qualify for consideration as allies, yet something about his demeanor troubled her in ways she couldn't articulate. "Sergeant Chen," she began, "our intelligence indicates your species possesses certain psychological traits that might prove useful in our current conflict. We're particularly interested in human responses to overwhelming odds." Chen removed his helmet, revealing features that seemed almost predatory, despite his species' apparently omnivorous nature. His eyes moved constantly, assessing the room's layout, the positions of guards, the locations of equipment that might serve as weapons or tools. Even in a supposedly safe environment, he maintained the alertness of a hunter. "You want to know how humans handle impossible situations?" he asked. "Simple. We do something stupid that works because the enemy expects us to do something smart. Could you elaborate?" Chen leaned back in his chair, apparently unconcerned that he was surrounded by beings who could kill him with their bare hands. "Take the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartans against hundreds of thousands of Persians. Everybody knew the Spartans were going to die. The Spartans knew they were going to die. But they held that pass for 3 days anyway, and their sacrifice inspired all of Greece to unite against the invasion." Dr. Yintala accessed human historical records. "The Greeks eventually won that war despite being vastly outnumbered." "Or consider the siege of Bastonia," Chen continued. "Surrounded, outnumbered, running low on everything. When the Germans demanded surrender, the American commander sent back a one-word reply: nuts. They held out until reinforcements arrived." Admiral Thexandra studied the human carefully. "Your species appears to view certain defeat as merely another tactical consideration." "We view surrender as defeat," Chen corrected. "Everything else is just varying degrees of victory." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every coalition species had evolved sophisticated surrender protocols to minimize casualties in hopeless situations. The concept of fighting to complete extinction was considered a sign of primitive thinking, a relic of pre-civilization mindsets. "Sergeant," Admiral Thexandra said slowly, "how would your species respond to an enemy like the Devourers?" Chen's expression grew serious. "Ma'am, if I understand your briefings correctly, these things want to exterminate all other intelligent life in the galaxy. From humanity's perspective, that makes this the simplest military situation possible." "How so?" "There's no such thing as excessive force when your enemy's goal is genocide. No such thing as acceptable losses when the alternative is extinction. No such thing as disproportionate response when they've declared war on existence itself." Chen's voice carried a cold certainty that made several coalition officers unconsciously step backward. "You've been fighting a war. We'd be fighting for survival. Those are two very different things." Admiral Thexandra realized she might have found exactly what the coalition needed: a species too stubborn to know when they were beaten. But as she looked into Sergeant Chen's eyes, she also wondered if humanity might prove more dangerous to their allies than their enemies. "Sergeant Chen," she said finally, "would you be willing to coordinate with our military planners? We may have need of your species' unique perspective." Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Admiral, you just made the best decision of your career, or the worst mistake in galactic history." As events would prove, he was absolutely right on both counts. The human fleet that arrived at Coalition Staging Area Omega-7 bore no resemblance to anything in galactic military doctrine. Where Coalition vessels were sleek instruments of precision warfare, The human ships looked like they had been cobbled together from industrial equipment and held together with determination and desperation. General Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer of the newly formed Human Expeditionary Force, stepped off the shuttle Indomitable and immediately began an assessment that would have shocked coalition planners. Instead of marveling at the advanced technology surrounding her, she was cataloging weaknesses in the base's defensive perimeter. "Your shield generators are positioned too predictably," she told Commander Zixthera during their first meeting. "Any enemy with half a brain could calculate firing solutions to create cascading failures. Also, your patrol routes follow mathematical patterns. We could break your security with a calculator and a timer." Zixthera's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement or concern. "General Mitchell, this base has been designed using 3 centuries of advanced military engineering. Our defensive systems have never been successfully breached. That's because you've been fighting enemies who think like you do," Mitchell replied, studying the holographic display of the base layout. "They approach your defenses logically, trying to find efficient solutions. What happens when someone just decides to ram a ship through your weakest point and damn the casualties?" The question troubled Zixthera more than he cared to admit. Coalition military doctrine emphasized minimal losses and maximum efficiency. The concept of deliberately accepting catastrophic casualties to achieve strategic objectives violated everything he had been taught about proper warfare. Dr. Yintala, who had been assigned as the primary liaison with human forces, observed the interaction with growing fascination. Her psychological profiles of humanity had prepared her for their disregard of conventional tactics, but seeing it in action was unsettling. General Mitchell discussed the potential sacrifice of entire ships and crews with the same casual tone she might use to order lunch. "General," Dr. Yintala interjected, "our analysis suggests such tactics would result in unacceptable casualty rates. Surely there are more efficient approaches." Mitchell turned to face the diminutive Karani scientist. "Doctor, what's more efficient, losing 10 ships and 1,000 crew members to destroy an enemy installation, or losing 100 ships and 10,000 crew members because you spent weeks trying to find a clean solution while the enemy reinforced their position?" "The ethical implications don't exist when the alternative is extinction," Mitchell cut her off. "Ethics are a luxury you enjoy when survival isn't in question. When it is, you do whatever it takes to win. Then you live with the consequences afterward." The philosophical divide between human and coalition thinking became apparent during the first joint planning session. Coalition strategists presented elegant battle plans that minimized risk through careful positioning and superior technology. Human planners responded with suggestions that made the aliens question their new allies' sanity. "You want to do what?" Admiral Thexandra asked when Colonel James Harrison finished outlining his proposal. "Load obsolete ships with nuclear warheads and use them as guided missiles," Harrison repeated calmly. "Your sensors show the Devourer bioships have thick armor, but relatively weak point defenses. A ship moving at maximum velocity would be almost impossible to stop once it reaches close range. Colonel, those are manned vessels. You're talking about suicide missions." Harrison's expression didn't change. "Yes, ma'am. Volunteers only, of course, but I guarantee you'll have more volunteers than ships." Dr. Yintala pulled up psychological evaluations of the human crew. The data was disturbing. Nearly 80% had indicated willingness to undertake missions with 0 survival probability, if the tactical situation warranted it. More troubling, they seemed to view such sacrifice as honorable rather than tragic. "This is madness," muttered Captain Velcora of the Nexari Engineering Corps. "No rational species would deliberately waste trained personnel on such missions." "We're not rational," admitted Lieutenant Commander David Park, the human naval liaison. "Rationality is what got you into this mess. You've been fighting a rational war against an enemy that doesn't care about your rules. Maybe it's time to try irrational solutions." The test came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected a Devourer probe fleet approaching the Kepler system. 6 massive bioships escorted by over 100 smaller vessels. Coalition forces in the area consisted of 2 fleet squadrons, badly outnumbered but positioned to delay the enemy advance. Admiral Kexmara, commanding the coalition forces, requested immediate reinforcement. High Command responded by dispatching the nearest available units, which happened to include the Human Experimental Squadron under Colonel Harrison's command. Coalition Fleet. This is Colonel Harrison aboard the Crazy Horse, came the transmission, as human ships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Recommend you pull back to minimum safe distance and prepare to provide fire support. We're going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Admiral Kex Mara watched in horror as the human ships accelerated directly toward the Devourer formation. Instead of the careful maneuvering and measured exchanges that characterized coalition naval combat, the humans simply pointed their ships at the enemy and pushed their engines past Redline. Coalition Fleet. This is Crazy Horse. We're beginning our attack run. If this works, hit them while they're confused. If it doesn't, try not to let our stupidity rub off on you. The first human ship to reach the Devourer line was the destroyer Vindictive. Instead of launching missiles or firing energy weapons, it simply drove itself directly into the side of a bioship 3 times its size. The explosion was visible from the outer planets as both vessels vaporized in a nuclear fireball. The Devourers, who had never encountered enemies willing to sacrifice valuable assets for minimal tactical gain, hesitated for crucial seconds. In that moment of confusion, 3 more human ships completed their suicide runs, each one taking out targets that would have required hours of conventional bombardment to destroy. All coalition units, this is Admiral Kex Mara. Attack pattern Delta 7. Target the confused formations on the periphery. What followed was the first clear coalition victory since the war began. The Devourer probe fleet, rattled by tactics they couldn't predict or counter, fell into disarray. Coalition forces, inspired by the humans' impossible courage, pressed their advantage with unprecedented aggression. When the battle ended, the Devourer probe fleet had been completely destroyed. The cost, 12 human ships and over 3,000 human lives, was staggering by coalition standards. But the tactical implications were even more significant. They don't know how to fight us, General Mitchell observed during the post-battle briefing. Their entire battle doctrine assumes enemies will behave rationally, trying to minimize losses while maximizing gains. When we ignore those assumptions, their tactical computers can't process our actions fast enough to respond effectively. Admiral Thexiandra studied the battle recordings with growing unease. The humans had achieved something the Coalition had thought impossible. They had genuinely surprised the Devourers. But the price had been horrible, and the tactical approach seemed to require an endless supply of people willing to die for strategic advantage. General, she said carefully, your casualties were enormous. How can such tactics be sustained? Mitchell's smile was grim but determined. Admiral, you've been worried about fighting the Devourers. We're planning to terrify them. There's a big difference between an enemy you can defeat and an enemy you can't understand. As reports of the human tactics spread through Devourer space, something unprecedented began to happen. For the first time in their species' history, the Devourers experienced uncertainty. They had encountered an enemy that violated every assumption about intelligent behavior, and their adaptation mechanisms were struggling to process the implications. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one too stupid to know when they should surrender. The war changed overnight. Within weeks of the first human engagement, reports flooded in from across the galaxy describing Devourer forces exhibiting behavior that defied 3 centuries of tactical analysis. Formations that had maintained perfect coordination for hundreds of battles began showing signs of hesitation. Advanced scouts started requesting unprecedented levels of backup before engaging even minor coalition forces. Deep within the primary Devourer bioship Eternal Hunger, the collective consciousness that directed their species struggled with concepts that had no precedent in their racial memory. The entity known as the Prime Consciousness had absorbed the experiences of millions of warriors across countless battlefields, but the data from recent engagements refused to integrate into coherent tactical patterns. The humans made no sense. Every projection model, every behavioral algorithm, every strategic framework that had successfully predicted enemy actions for millennia simply failed when applied to human combat behavior. The human ships fought with a disregard for self-preservation that suggested either severe neurological damage or complete tactical incompetence, yet their results were undeniably effective. Analysis, the Prime Consciousness demanded of its subsidiary minds. Inconclusive, came the response from 1,000 analytical nodes. Human combat behavior exhibits patterns consistent with terminal desperation, yet they volunteer for these missions. Their actions suggest ignorance of basic tactical principles, yet their strategic timing is often precise. They sacrifice valuable assets for minimal gains, yet these sacrifices consistently produce maximum psychological impact on our forces. The prime consciousness processed the contradiction. The Devourers had evolved as perfect predators, capable of analyzing prey behavior and adapting hunting strategies accordingly. But humans weren't behaving like prey. They were behaving like a virus, willing to destroy themselves to weaken their host. Meanwhile, in coalition space, the psychological impact of human tactics was creating ripple effects that military planners hadn't anticipated. Species that had spent centuries refining the art of measured warfare found themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about combat doctrine. Captain Morthek of the Velthari, Third Fleet, stood on his bridge, watching human ships prepare for what they casually called a ram run against a Devourer supply convoy. The sight filled him with a mixture of admiration and horror that he couldn't reconcile. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human squadron is requesting that we pull back to minimum safe distance. They're about to begin their attack." "Understood. Signal the fleet to withdraw to coordinates. 7-7 Mark IV. Captain Morthek watched as the human ships, barely more than metal, coffins filled with explosives and fury, accelerated toward an enemy formation that outmassed them by orders of magnitude. The rational part of his mind cataloged all the reasons why this was tactical insanity. The growing part of his consciousness that had been influenced by human example simply marveled at their courage. "Impact in 30 seconds, his weapons officer announced unnecessarily. Everyone on the bridge was watching the displays with morbid fascination. The first human ship, the frigate Last Stand, struck the lead Devourer vessel amidships. The explosion lit up the entire battlefield as antimatter containment systems failed catastrophically. The Devourer ship, designed to withstand any conventional weapon, simply disintegrated under the assault of physics itself. 3 more human ships followed in quick succession, each one guided by pilots who had volunteered knowing they would never see another sunrise. By the time the attack run concluded, the Devourer convoy had been completely destroyed, and with it over 8,000 human lives. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "they just eliminated a supply convoy that would have required 3 battle groups to engage conventionally. The tactical efficiency is remarkable." Captain Morthek said nothing. He was too busy wondering what it meant that he was beginning to see 8,000 casualties as an acceptable loss for strategic advantage. Human thinking was proving to be as contagious as it was effective. The change in coalition mentality became apparent during the battle for the Arcturus system. For the first time since the war began, coalition forces adopted tactics that prioritized victory over crew survival. Ships that would normally withdraw when shield strength dropped below 50% instead pressed their attacks until hull integrity failed. Commanders who had spent careers minimizing casualties began accepting losses that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Admiral Thexandra observed the transformation with growing concern. The humans had brought more than just new tactics to the coalition. They had brought a new philosophy of warfare that was fundamentally changing how other species approached combat. "Admiral," Dr. Yintala reported during the daily briefing, "I'm seeing psychological changes throughout the fleet. Non-human personnel are beginning to exhibit behavioral patterns that mirror human aggression. Suicide mission volunteers have increased by 400% among coalition species. Are you suggesting the humans are a negative influence on our people?" "I'm suggesting they're changing us into something we weren't before," Dr. Yintala replied carefully. "Whether that's positive or negative depends on whether we survive this war." The strategic situation was indeed improving. For the first time since the conflict began, coalition forces were advancing on multiple fronts. Devourer formations, confused by enemies who refused to behave predictably, were making tactical errors that would have been unthinkable in earlier phases of the war. But the cost was staggering. Casualty rates had increased across all coalition forces as commanders adopted increasingly aggressive strategies. Ships were being lost at 3 times the previous rate, and recruitment couldn't keep pace with the losses. General Mitchell, reviewing the strategic reports, seemed oddly pleased by developments that horrified coalition leadership. "You're teaching them to fight like humans," Admiral Thexandra observed during one of their increasingly tense planning sessions. We're teaching them to fight to win, Mitchell corrected. Your people are brave, Admiral, but they've been fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. They've been so concerned with preserving life that they forgot sometimes you have to spend lives to save them. The casualty rates are unsustainable. The casualty rates are necessary, Mitchell replied bluntly. You can rebuild ships. You can train new crews. You can't bring back extinct civilizations. The Devourers aren't offering terms for surrender. They're offering extinction. In that context, every loss short of complete annihilation is a victory. The philosophical divide might have torn the alliance apart, but external events intervened. Long-range sensors detected the approach of the main Devourer battle fleet, the massive bioships that represented the true strength of their empire. The force was so large that it defied conventional measurement, stretching across several light-years and containing enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Estimated time to reach Coalition core worlds? Admiral Thexandra asked, though she dreaded the answer. 47 standard days, Captain Kelvana reported. Admiral, they're not following any predictable approach vector. It appears they're moving to surround our entire defensive perimeter simultaneously. The situation was impossible. No military force in galactic history had ever faced odds so overwhelming. Even with their new tactics and human-inspired aggression, the Coalition fleet was outnumbered by factors that made victory a mathematical impossibility. General Mitchell studied the tactical projections with the same calm expression she might wear while reviewing lunch menus. Admiral, I think it's time for humanity to show you what we do when the odds are impossible. What do you mean? Mitchell's smile was sharp enough to cut through diamond. We're going to do something so completely insane that even the Devourers won't see it coming. We're going to attack. Admiral Thexandra stared at the human general as if she had declared her intention to breathe vacuum. General, they outnumber us 50-1. An attack would be suicide. Probably, Mitchell agreed cheerfully. But here's the thing about humans, Admiral. We've never let mathematical impossibility stop us from trying. And sometimes when you do something impossible, you discover it wasn't actually impossible after all. The Coalition was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their willingness to die. It was their refusal to accept that anything was truly hopeless. The human plan, when finally revealed, was so audacious that Admiral Thexandra seriously considered ordering psychiatric evaluations for the entire human command staff. General Mitchell stood before the assembled Coalition leadership, calmly proposing to attack the largest military force in galactic history, with tactics that seemed designed by madmen. Operation Thunderstrike, Mitchell began, activating a holographic display that showed the approaching Devourer fleet. We're going to hit them where they least expect it, everywhere at once. Commander Zixthera leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the tactical projections. General, their formation spans 3 light-years. Simultaneous attack on all fronts would require dispersing our forces beyond any hope of mutual support. Exactly, Mitchell replied with disturbing enthusiasm. They're expecting us to concentrate our forces for maximum effectiveness. Instead, we're going to spread out so thin that we'll be attacking with individual ships and squadrons against formations that outmass us by thousands to 1. That's suicide, Admiral Kexmara protested. Individual vessels couldn't possibly survive? Mitchell interrupted. You're absolutely right. Most of them won't. But survival isn't the objective. The objective is to create so much chaos across such a wide front that their command structure can't process what's happening fast enough to coordinate an effective response. Dr. Yin. Taylor studied the human psychological profiles again, searching for some explanation that would make their strategy comprehensible. General Mitchell, your own tactical analysis shows a projected survival rate of less than 15% for participating forces. How can you justify such losses? Doctor, what's the survival rate if we do nothing? Mitchell asked. 0%. What's the survival rate if we fight conventionally? Still 0%. At least this way some of us might live long enough to make a difference. The debate continued for hours, but gradually the Coalition leadership began to understand the terrible logic behind the human approach. The Devourers had adapted to conventional warfare by developing strategies that could counter any rational tactical approach. But what if the Coalition simply abandoned rationality altogether? Captain Lorvex of the Nexari Science Corps ran probability calculations on the human plan. The mathematics were horrifying. Casualties would be unprecedented, losses would be catastrophic, and the most likely outcome was still total defeat. But buried in the statistical analysis was something that hadn't existed in previous projections: uncertainty. For the first time since the war began, the outcome wasn't mathematically predetermined. The human strategy created so many variables that accurate prediction became impossible. In a war where the enemy's greatest advantage was their ability to adapt to predictable tactics, unpredictability might be the coalition's only hope. Admiral, Captain Lorvex reported, the human strategy does have one significant advantage. If implemented correctly, it will force the Devourers to make tactical decisions faster than their adaptation systems can process new information. Their greatest strength, their ability to learn and evolve, becomes a liability when confronted with too much contradictory data. Admiral Thexandra stared at the tactical projections, seeing her civilization's death warrant written in streams of probability calculations. But she also saw something else, the first genuine chance of victory they had possessed since the war began. "General Mitchell," she said finally, "how long do you need to prepare your forces?" "We're ready now," Mitchell replied. "Human ships have been modified for single-use missions. Crews have been briefed and volunteers selected. We can begin operations within 6 hours." The casual way Mitchell discussed the imminent death of thousands of her own people still chilled Thexandra to her core, but the alternative was the extinction of every sapient species in the galaxy. "Very well. Operation Thunderstrike is approved. May whatever gods watch over us have mercy on our souls." 3 days later, the impossible began. Across a front spanning multiple star systems, individual human ships dropped out of FTL and immediately engaged Devourer formations that should have vaporized them before they could orient themselves. Instead of the careful coordination that characterized coalition fleet actions, each ship operated independently, attacking whatever targets presented themselves without regard for mutual support or escape routes. The effect on Devourer command structures was immediate and catastrophic. The Prime Consciousness, accustomed to analyzing coherent enemy strategies, found itself facing thousands of simultaneous tactical situations that seemed to follow no discernible pattern. Human ships attacked supply convoys with the same ferocity they showed against battleships. Single frigates engaged formations that could have destroyed entire coalition fleets. "Analysis incomplete," reported the subsidiary mines as data flooded in from across the battlefield. "Human forces appear to be attacking randomly. No strategic objectives identified. No tactical coordination detected. Recommend classification as mass neurological failure." But the Prime Consciousness was beginning to suspect something more dangerous than madness. The human attacks, while individually suicidal, were having cumulative effects that couldn't be dismissed as random. Supply lines were being disrupted. Communications networks were failing under the strain of processing too many simultaneous crises. Formation integrity was breaking down as units responded to local threats without central coordination. For the first time in their species' history, the Devourers were experiencing something they had no evolutionary framework to understand: confusion. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Defiant, exemplified the human approach to impossible odds. Her ship was attacking a Devourer supply convoy that outmassed her vessel by a factor of 50, accompanied only by 2 frigates whose crews had volunteered for what everyone knew was a one-way mission. "Target the lead vessel," she ordered calmly, as if discussing weekend plans rather than preparation for certain death. "Full power to engines. Engineering, prepare for emergency power transfer to forward weapons." "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "at this range, their return fire will destroy us before we can achieve more than minimal damage to their shields." "Then we'll have to get closer," Santos replied. "Helm, plot an intercept course. Maximum velocity." The Defiant accelerated directly toward the enemy formation, her crew working with the calm efficiency of people who had already accepted their fate. As Devourer weapons began targeting their ship, Santos made a decision that would have court-martialed her in any conventional navy. "All hands, this is the captain. We're going to ram the largest ship we can reach. It's been an honor serving with you." The destroyer struck the Devourer supply ship at 70% of light speed. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away as matter converted directly to energy. Both ships vaporized instantly, along with most of their escorts. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human crews discovered that determination could sometimes substitute for overwhelming firepower. The Devourer fleet, designed to fight rational enemies who valued survival, found itself facing adversaries who treated death as just another tactical tool. Within hours, reports began reaching Coalition High Command that seemed too incredible to believe. Devourer formations were breaking off engagements. Supply convoys were rerouting to avoid contact with human forces. Most shocking of all, some Devourer units were actually retreating from sectors where they held overwhelming numerical superiority. "They're afraid," Dr. Yentala reported with something approaching awe. For the first time in their evolutionary history, the Devourers are experiencing fear. They can't predict what humans will do next, and uncertainty is more terrifying to them than any conventional weapon. General Mitchell reviewed the casualty reports with the same expression she might wear while reading a weather forecast. Over 40,000 human lives had been lost in the first wave of attacks, but the strategic results exceeded even her most optimistic projections. "Admiral," she told Thexandra, "we've proven the concept works. The Devourers can't adapt to tactics they can't understand. But this is just the beginning. If we're going to win this war, we need to do something that will make today's operations look conservative by comparison." Admiral Thexandra dreaded asking, but the question was inevitable. "What do you have in mind?" Mitchell's smile was sharp enough to split atoms. "We're going to attack their home world." The suggestion was so preposterous that several coalition officers simply stared at her in stunned silence. The Devourer homeworld was located at the heart of their empire, protected by defensive installations that could destroy entire fleets. It was surrounded by multiple layers of patrol ships, automated defense platforms, and planetary shields that had never been penetrated. "General," Zixthera said carefully, "their home system is the most heavily fortified location in known space. The defensive forces alone outnumber our entire navy, which is exactly why they won't expect us to attack it," Mitchell replied cheerfully. "They'll assume we're too smart to try something so obviously suicidal. They'll be wrong." Admiral Thexandra realized that humanity had fundamentally altered her understanding of warfare. Where she once saw mathematical impossibilities, she now saw opportunities disguised as insanity. "Insanity. General Mitchell," she said quietly, "what do you need?" The attack on the Devourer homeworld began with a single human ship emerging from FTL at the edge of their most sacred system. The vessel was the modified freighter Prometheus, carrying a crew of 12 volunteers and enough antimatter to crack a moon in half. Captain Elena Vasquez transmitted a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "This is Captain Vasquez of the Human Expeditionary Force. We're here to deliver a message from humanity to the Devourer species. The message is simple. You picked the wrong fight." The Devourers detected the human ship immediately, but their response revealed how profoundly the war had changed them. Instead of the confident aggression that had characterized their species for millennia, they hesitated. The prime consciousness, now burdened with too many examples of human unpredictability, struggled to determine what threat a single small vessel could possibly represent. That hesitation cost them everything. The Prometheus accelerated directly toward the planet's surface, her crew singing old Earth battle hymns as defensive installations tried desperately to target a ship moving too fast and too erratically for their targeting systems to track. As antimatter warheads began detonating in the upper atmosphere, the Devourer homeworld experienced something unprecedented in their billion-year history: vulnerability. The explosion didn't destroy the planet, but it sent shockwaves through the Devourer collective consciousness that no amount of physical damage could have achieved. Their homeworld, the sacred center of their empire, had been touched by enemy fire. The psychological impact was devastating, but the real attack had only just begun. As the Devourers reeled from the symbolic assault on their most protected world, thousands of human ships dropped out of FTL throughout their core systems. Operation Final Gambit, the largest suicide mission in galactic history, had commenced with the coordination of a species that had never learned to accept defeat. Admiral Thexandra watched from the command center of the Righteous Fury, positioned at maximum sensor range from the carnage. The tactical displays showed impossible scenes, human frigates engaging orbital platforms that outmassed them by factors of hundreds, Destroyers ramming space stations the size of small moons, fighters diving into planetary defense grids with the fury of avenging angels. Casualty reports, she requested, though she dreaded the answer. 92% of human forces destroyed or disabled, Captain Kelvana reported. However, Admiral, their objectives appear to have been achieved. Devourer defensive formations are in complete disarray. Their command networks are failing across multiple systems. General Mitchell, standing beside the Admiral with the calm expression of someone watching a training exercise, rather than the apocalyptic finale of an interstellar war, nodded approvingly at the reports. Phase 2 begins now, she announced, activating her communication array. All Coalition forces, this is General Mitchell. The humans have opened the door. Time for the rest of you to walk through it. What followed was the largest military operation in galactic history. Coalition fleets that had been held in reserve suddenly emerged from hidden positions throughout Devourer space. The enemy, their attention focused on the chaos created by human suicide attacks, found themselves facing coordinated assaults from directions they had thought secure. The Velthari Third Fleet, led by Commander Zixthera, struck at the heart of the Devourer industrial complex. The Nexari Engineering Corps deployed quantum weapons that unraveled the molecular structure of bioships. The Zephyrian hive mind coordinated attacks with precision that the enemy's disrupted command systems couldn't match. But it was the transformation in coalition fighting spirit that proved decisive. Inspired by human example, species that had fought defensively for centuries suddenly adopted tactics that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Ships rammed enemy formations when conventional weapons failed. Crews volunteered for missions with minimal survival prospects. Commanders accepted casualties that would have ended their careers in peacetime. The Devourers, faced with enemies who had learned to think like humans, discovered that their adaptation mechanisms were useless against opponents who refused to behave rationally. Their collective consciousness evolved to process and counter logical tactical approaches, simply couldn't function when confronted with adversaries who treated logic as an optional consideration. Deep within the failing network of bioships that had once represented the pinnacle of Devourer evolution, the Prime Consciousness experienced something that had no precedent in their racial memory: despair. The humans had done more than defeat them militarily. They had infected the entire galaxy with their incomprehensible willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Analysis it demanded of its remaining subsidiary, minds. The enemy no longer follows predictable behavioral patterns, came the fragmenting response. Human influence has spread throughout coalition forces. Standard adaptation protocols are ineffective against opponents who deliberately choose inefficient tactics for psychological impact. The Prime Consciousness processed this information with growing horror. The humans hadn't just taught the galaxy new tactics, they had taught it a new philosophy of warfare. The infection was spreading, creating enemies that fought like the humans themselves, unpredictably, irrationally, and with complete disregard for acceptable losses. Recommendation? It asked. Withdraw from all contested systems. Establish new defensive perimeters in the outer rim. Avoid further contact with human-influenced forces until adaptation protocols can be updated. For the first time in their billion-year history, the Devourers were retreating not from superior force, but from an enemy they couldn't understand. The war ended not with a climactic battle, but with a gradual recognition that the Devourers were no longer capable of offensive operations. Their fleets, once the terror of the galaxy, had been reduced to defensive formations protecting increasingly isolated strongholds. Their adaptation mechanisms, their greatest evolutionary advantage, had become a liability when faced with enemies who refused to provide consistent data to analyze. Admiral Thexandra stood on the bridge of the Righteous Fury, watching Devourer ships withdraw from the Kepler system where the war had truly begun. Around her, coalition officers celebrated the first decisive victory their people had known in 3 centuries. But the Admiral found herself troubled by questions that had no easy answers. The humans had saved the galaxy, but they had also changed it forever. Species that had once prized measured response and minimal casualties now spoke casually of acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. The philosophical transformation was as profound as the military victory. General Mitchell approached, her expression carrying satisfaction tinged with exhaustion. Congratulations, Admiral. The galaxy is safe. At what cost? Thexandra asked quietly. We've become something we weren't before. You've become something that can survive, Mitchell replied. The universe is a dangerous place, Admiral. Sometimes you need dangerous people to protect the peaceful ones. As the last Devourer ships disappeared beyond the edge of sensor range, Dexandra reflected on the price of victory. The humans had taught the galaxy to fight like humans, with courage that bordered on madness and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance of victory. The Devourers were gone, but their legacy remained in the form of a galaxy that had learned humanity's greatest lesson. Sometimes the only way to win an impossible war is to refuse to acknowledge that it's impossible. In the years that followed, the Coalition would face new threats and new challenges, but they would face them with the understanding that survival sometimes required embracing the very madness that rational minds sought to avoid. They had learned that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It's the one too stubborn to know when they're beaten. The humans had shown them that sometimes, in a universe full of impossible odds, the only rational response is to be completely irrational, and in that lesson lay both their salvation and their transformation into something the galaxy had never seen before. Civilizations that fought to win, no matter the cost. The war was over, but the age of human-influenced warfare had only just begun.